Continuing on with chapter 10, at the bottom it says, our food choices are also energy choices. All right, so on page 298, we have some pictures of the amount of food it takes to produce 1 kilogram of food for humans to eat. So it takes 20 kilograms of food, corn or hay, to produce 1 kilogram of beef to eat. So really, if you're going to eat a kilogram of beef, you could actually feed 20 people instead of 1 person if you just fed the people this food instead of giving it to the cow. And you could feed 7.3 people if you just fed the people the vegetables and the grains instead of giving them to the pork where you could only feed 1 person. Well, why does it get lost? Well, remember trophic levels. That every time you move up a trophic level, you lose 90% of the energy on average. In this case, you're losing 95% of the energy. And so meat is quite terrible because not only are you using a lot of grains that could go to humans to eat, and now putting them into meat products and animal products, we're losing a lot of that energy because it's getting lost as heat in these animals just being animals. But we also use a lot of pesticides, fertilizers, and we negatively impact the environment by growing the food to feed to the animals. And so there's a lot of people who have given up beef and pork because they're the most intensive use of resources. And so they'll still have eggs and chickens and milk down here because they don't use as much natural resources to grow. This picture here shows that it requires a lot of land depending on the animal, and then a lot of water depending on the animal too. And so again, meat uses a lot of land, uses a lot of food, uses a lot of energy and water. And so our love of meat in the United States does become an environmental problem. Now, a lot of my students don't want to hear that. I've been teaching APES for a long time, and this is a subject that a lot of kids go, yeah, I get that, let's eat less meat. And a lot of them go, no way, I love my meat, I'll never give it up. And really it's a personal choice, but I have to lay out for you the environmental impact of meat. That's part of our curriculum and part of our course. One thing I encourage many of my students to do is eat less meat. In my family, we still eat meat, but we don't eat it every day. We eat it maybe 3 times a week, and the rest of our meals are meatless. For example, tonight I'm making a vegetarian stew, and we'll have it with a salad. I'm making it with acorn squash and some spinach and some beans, and so we'll get our protein in there with the garbanzo beans, and we'll get good nutrition without meat. I make lasagnas with spinach in it. I make sweet potato enchiladas. So I make a lot of things without meat. And that's what I encourage my students and their families to do, because when people eat less meat, there's less of an impact on the environment. All right, aquaculture is fish farming. There's some positives and negatives with fish farms. So, you always think, well, your fish must be caught in the wild on a fishing ship, and they go out and they catch your fish and they bring it in and that's what you eat. But it's not always the case. A lot of them are farmed fish in big pens, either pens on the shore of the ocean. By the shore, they rope off and net off an area and they have fish growing in there, or in big pools inland. So there's some positive things with aquaculture, and there's some negative things with aquaculture. So know the positives. We can have good protein sources. We can prevent some overfishing, which is a big problem. Some of the negative problems is fish poo. What do we do with all that fish poo? It has a lot of nitrates in it. That's a big problem. Diseases can spread among the fish very easily because they're so close together. And then genetically modified fish like salmon maybe can escape and infect or breed or outcompete with the wild population. Page 300, we have some sustainable agricultural practices. And there's an FRQ that you might get, which talks about how do we sustainably raise lower different levels. Well, we can sustainably raise our nitrates and phosphates naturally by adding manure. We plant legumes like soy to add nitrates. So these are some natural ways without synthetic fertilizers. We can raise and lower our pH naturally by adding lime to acidic soils to make them more alkaline. Now lime, not talking about the lime fruit, I'm talking about phosphorus, which we call limestone. Or if you have alkaline soil and you need to make it more acidic, you can add sulfur. So these are natural ways to raise and lower pH. Okay, under sustainable agriculture we talk about organic agriculture, and in 1990 we started having regulations for when something can be called organic or not. And so these are some of the provisions of organic agriculture. You have to meet these provisions if you can label yourself as organic, and these provisions if you're going to label your meat as organic. So read through these and be able to understand these. You do not have to memorize them, but you need to know the difference, some of the basic differences between organic and non-organic foods. Turning to page 302, I do not have a sticky note, but I don't know what happened to my sticky note, but right here on 382, under the science behind the stories, organic farming, we have the topsoil of organic farming as being very important. They found that topsoil on organic farms held greater quantities of water, had higher concentrations of microbial life than conventionally farmed soil. Also here it says it has more nutrients, more nutrient-rich topsoil, greater earthworm activity, all signs of soil that is very, very healthy. And so this is one of the pieces of evidence that organic farming might be better not only for the environment, but for sustainable agriculture. Here's some other examples of supporting our locally grown farmers. We can support our local farmer, and we can also have less pollution from transporting foods by buying locally grown foods. We can buy locally grown foods at farmers markets. We can get CSA boxes. We can have rooftop gardens, which they have in New York City a lot. And so these are ways that we can reduce the impact of foods and crops and agriculture of things that we buy. So when you're at the grocery store and you want grapes, but they're from Chile, that's not great because Chile is like 5,000 miles away. So it took a lot of fossil fuels, a lot of diesel fuel, a lot of cost and pollution to transport those grapes all the way up to the U.S. And while it might be nice to eat grapes in the middle of winter, the environmental cost is pretty high. Instead, we should be eating foods that are naturally grown during the winter. And that is the end of Chapter 10, Sticky Notes.